Our next talk is going to be a panel, What's New with Federated Identity for Science? And our moderator is Jim Basney. So Jim is a principal research scientist. He is a member of Trusted CI, and he also is my boss. Welcome, Jim.
Thanks, Jeanette. Hi, everyone. Yes, well done, Jeanette. Thank you very much. So I hope you all had a good lunch and you're excited to have a discussion with us on this topic of federated identity for science and what's new. The way it's going to go is that each of us on the panel are going to give some short introductory remarks to sort of kick the discussion off. And as we're doing that, please be thinking about what questions you want to ask the panel. They would much rather answer your questions than answer my questions as moderator. So please be ready to come up to the microphones and ask questions about this topic. We're not assuming that anybody is an expert in federated identity, so there's no prerequisite for asking your question on this topic. So please don't be shy. We're going to go in the order of Anne, then Julian, and then Mark, and then me, and then we'll have our panel discussion. And so let's jump right in. So first, we'll hear from Ann West.
Hi, thanks, Jim. I am Ann West. I'm the Senior Research Partnerships person for InCommon. I work for Internet 2 and collaborate pretty extensively, as you might guess, with Dana Brunson, Lauren Michael, and all the RCD folks over on the other side of Internet 2. So I'm going to start, I'm kind of the warm-up band. While I'm relatively new to research IT, I've been in the federated space and identity and access management for over 2 decades and was part of one of those NSF middleware initiative things long time ago in the early 2000s and did outreach for that. So I've been around the block a bit, and I wanted to start out with just a little story, because that kind of helps set a framework. So basically, Sarah Smith at Amazing State University was checking on her new NSF award through research.gov. It was October 2024, and the leaves were just starting to turn. She had lots of planning to do in a meeting with her research lab manager lead to talk through next steps. Glancing through her email, though, she noticed a Dear Colleague letter from NSF requiring all users to add MFA to their login process. If you remember, that was login.gov, or it was the NSF login. Sarah knew she used MFA in her Amazing State credential login to research.gov through something called InCommon Federation. But does she have to do anything more? So we're going to answer that a little bit later in the talk. So to get us started, I'm going to kind of give you a real quick primer about how federated access works. Because in our conversations with each other, we decided, hey, introductory material is always a good thing. So if you know about this, you can read your email. If this looks interesting to you, hopefully you'll learn something. So I'm going to equate it to a beer tent and going to a beer festival. We're here in Denver, or outside of Denver, and Colorado, near Fort Collins. Lots of good beer here, so maybe you'll get some later. But let's start out with how those work, right? You buy a ticket, you show up to get a wristband, you show your ID, they look at your name, is that mapped to the ticket? They look at your face, is that mapped to your ID? They look at your age, is that over 21? They may also look at group membership. Are you part of a beer drinkers, club of Denver? Yep, you can get to those particular or different types of beer tents with those. So they give you a wristband. Then you go get your beer. So this is similar to what you do in a federated context, right? So your wristbands are granted by your institution. I have 3 institutions here, Michigan State, University of Miami, and Amherst College. And those institutions have relationships with other service providers, either contractual relationship. In the case of a nature journal, there may be a consortial relationship like Amherst 5 course sharing across the 5 Amherst 5 schools. It may be your relationship as a researcher with the LIGO collaboration. It may be because you're a researcher through nsf.gov, or a hosted Canvas LMS because you also teach classes. So all of these are very different use cases, and you may have access to some or all of them depending on your relationship and your institution's relationship with these service providers. So you'll notice, so all of these are published in, for instance, the InCommon Federation, but just because they're in the Federation doesn't mean you have access to them. So let's be, I'm from Amherst College, and let's say I want to go to see the, and use the course management system, the Canvas LMS. So the way the federated transaction works is I actually go to the service provider first. I go to the Canvas LMS site that's for my particular institution. The Canvas LMS site will say, hey, I don't know where you're from. Tell me where you're from. I basically say I'm from Amherst College, and they go to InCommon and they pull down the information that is needed to then make that secure transaction to request single sign-on or verify you've been authenticated, maybe request MFA in the future, maybe request assurance level. It also may request, they also may request some basic information about you, for instance. So they request it of Amherst College. Amherst College pulls down the information from the Canvas LMS site. I'm getting this request from Canvas LMS. Is this the same site I should be? Is this the right site that I should be connecting with, right? And they set up a secure TLS transaction, and that information happens, transaction happens, a single sign-on happens for the end user, information is sent to the Canvas LMS site. Boom, you are in. You can see the little guy down the bottom with the red wristband. So, as I mentioned, InCommon supports the federated, in this particular, this federated InCommon Federation supports multiple different use cases. Researchers want attribution, right? They're going to a collaboration, they want people to know who they are, they want to share their email address. Great, we have one for that. Library users don't. They just want to access the journal, the various articles, but they don't necessarily want folks to know, the journal to know, or frankly, the library long-term to know that they're accessing particular materials. NIH mandates multi-factor authentication for access into their grants management system. Great, InCommon can support that. And in the future, identity assurance for controlled access data repositories. Great, InCommon is working on supporting that. And then another one, right? Industry, Benalogic HR solution has special contract terms. So you can also leverage industry published services through InCommon, like Zoom, like Benalogic, and others. So we have a formal relationship with all the members of InCommon, a contract to ensure good behavior, and technology to simplify integration, policy to ensure trust, and we publish a global phone book. So not only does InCommon register US organizations, we also participate in something called EduGain, which is essentially an international information exchange for registered systems across the R&E community globally. So this sets up, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to the right place, you're using the right keys, you have the right user information so that the user interface information. So when a user goes from the service to single sign-on, they understand where they're going from and where they're going to. So it's sort of a, user handoff, user experience information. So here we are by the numbers, almost 1,100 organizations, 610 trusted login services. You can think of that as single sign-on. And then over 6,000 trusted services just in the US. And we integrate with EduGain, 76 countries around the world, 6,000 trusted login services. That's a lot of what we call identity providers. and then close to 10,000 services worldwide. So I'm just going to leave with this particular slide that talks overall about the types of things that we offer through federated access and the types of use cases that we support. And with that kind of baseline kind of warm-up band, I'll pass it over to Julian.
I'm not sure I'm going to be a good follow-up. That was amazing. I'm Julian. I am the IT manager for the research vessel Sikuliak. I'm also the PI on a new project called SURFIT, Shared Unified Research Vessel IT Support. I'm here sort of partially representing the U.S. academic research fleet. So I thought for those who aren't super familiar, I'd give a little overview of the ARF. We are considered an NSF major facility, but we're a little bit of an outlier in that we are this sort of distributed group operated by 14 institutions, 17 vessels, subs, and other platforms. We also include the Deep Submergence Facility, the Oceanographic Aircraft Facility, and the Oceanographic Seismic Facility. These vessels are either owned by one of the federal agencies that are funding us or by the individual institutions. And our funding breakdown is mostly NSF, but then we're also partially funded by ONR, NOAA, and the USGS. The ARF is comprised of several different vessel classes. We start with the global class vessels. These are our sort of flagship vessels that can operate all over the world. The Tommy Thompson, the Roger Revell, the Sikuliak, which I'm representing, the Marcus Langseth, and the Atlantis. These generally have endurance of up to about 45 days at sea and carry between 26 and 34 science passengers. The Sikuliak, my ship, very proud of her. We are one of the only ice-capable research vessels left in the U.S. academic fleet. We're capable of operating all over the world, up into the Arctic. This coming year, we're going to be operating down in the Antarctic, and we can carry up to 24 science personnel on board with a range of 18,000 nautical miles or 45 days of endurance. We also then have the oceanographic or the oceanic or intermediate class of vessels, the Kilomoana, Atlantic Explorer. We used to have the RV Endeavor, who has just been retired, the Sally Ride, and the Neil Armstrong. And these are generally more for ocean basin type work, so they wouldn't say leave the Atlantic or leave the Pacific, because they have slightly less endurance. And then we've got the regional class research vessels. Currently, the Hugh Sharp, operated by the University of Delaware, but coming soon, we will be having 3 new vessels coming online. And this was kind of alluded to in the Secure by Design, where as these vessels were being designed and manufactured, we're building cybersecurity sort of baked in to the systems as they're being built. But these will be designed for sort of shorter trips into sort of more regional areas. So that'll be the Tawny, the Narragansett Dawn, and the Gilbert Mason. We also have some of the local class vessels. These are sort of much smaller. They tend to be multi-purpose vessels. We've got the Walton Smith, the Blue Heron, the Savannah, the Pelican, the Sproul, and the Rachel Carson. And again, smaller vessels, significantly less endurance, but they can go and do into some unique little areas and do some really cool science. And that's that.
Good afternoon, folks. My name is Mark Rank, and I'm the Director of Compliance and Strategic Insights at a company called Cirrus Identity. And no, this isn't a sales pitch. We provide IT services for over 10 years to a number of the research community, both on the identity provider or the login method, as Ann talked about, and then also on the application side. And we operate a number of these throughout the world, but primarily in common. And we do that for a couple of reasons. That's the real reason I'm here. In order to support research and collaboration, you need to have people collaborating. And oftentimes there's friction involved in trying to provide access solutions. End users want to get their work done. Research application operators, they want to often support their applications for a large number of institutions across the country. And the authenticating institutions, they definitely want to foster collaboration, foster their researchers at their institution. So they also are interested in this kind of collaboration. And it's about aligning those interests from those three different groups. The challenge, the sources of friction are end users are often caught, and we're talking about research, not only research PIs, we're talking about field individuals that maybe are collecting or providing data and so on. They're often caught between the application world and the identity provider world, and they don't have a good support experience many times. Research application operators, SPs, they have a specific lens that they're looking at for security. They're looking at not only secure operation and secure access, they're looking for some degree of assurance. Again, the kinds of things that NSF and other federal agencies have talked about. However, the uniformity among the different login providers is not always guaranteed. And that's where organizations like InCommon can help. And then authentication organizations, IDPs, are also have a set of interests that sometimes can cause friction. They have security issues themselves. They also have data governance issues. What do you mean you need my email address? We don't give out email addresses outside the institution. So again, there's competing priorities. Often institutions will have competing priorities that are focused more on delivering services for their immediate community, and that can present friction. So I just wanted to present that as a dynamic that we want to talk about over the panel discussion. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim.
Thank you, Mark. So in addition to working on Trusted CI, I also lead the CI Logon project at NCSA, which benefits from all the great things you've already heard about.
Come a little
Really
closer to the
benefits
mic?
from the InCommon Federation. How's that? That's better? Okay. So at CI Logon, we've been operating the service now for over 15 years to enable secure federated logon to scientific cyber infrastructure. And we aim to do that in a way that's seamless for the researcher so they can do their login and get access to the resources that they should get access to. And so we do that enabled by federated identity, supporting thousands of active users from those hundreds of organizations connected through InCommon and Edugain. And we also provide management of those users in the collaboration through onboarding and offboarding, managing attributes, groups, and roles according to the researchers' roles and participation in the collaboration. So if you were to visit demo.cilogon.org, if you are from an InCommon enabled campus, you could log in and see an identity token according to the OpenID Connect standard that has all these attributes here. And I just want to focus, this is my last slide, I just want to focus on a few really valuable attributes that are now available because of a lot of effort in the Federation and in the community. And so it's taken a lot of time to make these attributes available, but what's new? They're available now, and I think they're meeting a lot of our emerging use cases. So the first one is the authentication context reference that is saying that my authentication followed the REFED's MFA standard. And so that's what enables me to log in with MFA to research.gov that Han talked about. Next is an EduPerson assurance attribute, again, asserting a set of REFED standards based on how my identity was proofed on campus and the level of proofing that was done. Did I receive a unique identifier? Could that identifier be reassigned, for example? So depending on the level of assurance requirements of the application, we now have an international standard that we can rely on. Also, if we want to know if a researcher accessing our system is faculty, staff, student at a particular university, maybe a university in the United States, then we can get an affiliation attribute. So in my case, it's saying that I'm staff at NCSA at the University of Illinois. And then if we want to see what scientific data should I have access to as a researcher, we might check what collaboration groups I'm a member of. So there's an is member of attribute available there. And so what's new is that I think we now have a rich set of federated attributes that we can all benefit from thanks to the community work using platforms like CI Logon and Cirrus and others that participate in the federation. So now that we've all introduced ourselves and some of the ideas around federation, let's have a discussion. Now would be a great time to start coming up to microphones with questions. I'll just leave this slide up. It has contact information, URLs with more information about InCommon and EduGain, and some information about events like InCommon Basecamp and the InCommon Technology Exchange. And I think we have a brave soul to ask our first question. Please go right ahead.
Intelligence test. Oh, okay. So I'll be the brave soul to signal my ignorance a little bit. So those new attributes are interesting. Are those member of attributes defined by the home institution? And a follow-up but unrelated question is, this looks great for the web, but what about us poor SSH people?
Any brave panelists like to answer those questions?
I can answer the SSH question, possibly. So we're looking at how the web authentication can map into SSH keys. We do have a solution, and we'll be following up. So hopefully sometime early next year, you'll hear some information about that.
Mark? Yep.
Can talk a little bit about the member of. Oftentimes they are sourced from the institution. However, there are these entities called virtual organizations that can also manage and support that kind of member of attribute, and that allows some degree of separation between the individual institutions and a virtual organization, a virtual research project, which allows a little more control on the project side for controlling access. Does that help a little bit?
All right, well, follow-up questions are also welcome, but we have another question. Please go ahead.
All right, so my question is a little different. I was listening to the presentation and I was just kind of curious as if you guys had a specific instance where federated identity was kind of just hitting roadblocks and with a specific application, or if you had a specific service that you've had difficulty with implementing or kind of got the most pushback from, because I know someone had mentioned Canvas, and when the university went and implemented multi-factor authentication across the board with our Microsoft tenant, it produced a lot of SSO kind of timeout issues. So I was just curious if there was a specific service that, as you guys have been implementing this, that you've gotten the most pushback from.
I was going to say, integration with any kind of service and how, for instance, the service supports federated aspects of, so it's not just straight SAML, right? When you're looking at the MFA profile, you're actually signaling through an auth context, but the integration is not always from vendor to vendor to vendor the same. So, for instance, the learning management system and Canvas, if you have an issue with that, you should let us know, because that is Internet to Net Plus service, and we sort of treat them with a little more white gloves. But yeah, if you have an issue with integration with particular service, let us know, and we can see if we can reach out or help or connect you up with another school that has actually addressed that. I don't know if that's answering your question.
But as of right now, in terms of implementation or in terms of kind of releasing this, you haven't gotten any sort of particular application that specifically struggled. I was just curious if there were one or two that you were saying like, yeah, this one is more difficult or this one is easier to implement, or if it's kind of just the same across the board.
I would say it's different across the board. Yeah.
I bet Julian could tell us a little bit about the challenges of federated identity on ships and low bandwidth environments that might also be an example for that question.
Yeah, sure. So the academic research fleet is in the process of rolling out some FortiGate firewalls to try and unify the experience across the whole fleet. And one of the things we're trying to do is to integrate federated identity so researchers come to the different ships and they have the same experience and they can utilize their university credentials. And yeah, it's been a little bit of a struggle at times. The big struggle we're coming up against is that we can't afford the SAML authentication costs, and so we're trying to do it through OpenID Connect, which is free, but then trying to do some kind of intermediary IDP for ourselves to enable that. But the question you asked was about our low bandwidth environments, and that, yeah, the fleet is kind of unique in that we can have great internet and we can have zero internet. And so we need to be able to design systems that will work in a spectrum of bandwidth capability.
Great. Anything you wanted to add, Mark? Or
Being a company that does a lot of the integrations, as Ann outlined, there's a wide spectrum. And it goes a little bit to the challenges of meeting a happy middle ground between the application provider and the identity provider. And so oftentimes when there are challenges with integration, there may be technical reasons, there may be policy reasons, there may be any number of reasons, and that can vary from one service provider to another. In case of some service providers, it can even vary between one institution and a number because of the choices those institutions are making in terms of how they're implementing Canvas or how they are implementing Zoom for their institution. So there's a wide variety. Oftentimes it's getting the two parties to talk to each other a little bit.
I've got another question.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if I missed this earlier on, but is there any outreach going beyond higher ed and research to communities like K-12 or other educational related communities for the use of the in-common service?
We haven't done outreach for in-common in K-12. We have done with Eduroam though. So we are rolling out Eduroam. I think we have it close to, I think, 10 states. Primarily in the West. If you're interested in that, I'm happy to talk about that as well. In terms of in common in K-12, we are not as much. I would say it's more community colleges, tribal colleges through the MSCC program, as well as then primarily focused on higher education and the research side. My guess is K-12 is coming, but at this point, it's not on our radar. So,
Please go ahead.
Hi. So I work with a few national projects that make use of identity providers at, American universities, for instance, kind of just to say, hey, it's an American student or a citizen or whatever, and you should get access to these resources. We've seen, at least I've heard this indirectly from others who are in the identity management realm for these projects, many cases where some universities are, still providing the identities or saying, yes, they're still students and or still faculty, and they really aren't. I mean, it's, an offboarding issue at those universities usually. I know the real answer is you trust the identity provider to do the right thing, but are there solutions, or is there any work being done on, solving that as an issue of the cases where you've got these identity providers that aren't really doing the right thing and are maybe saying, providing the attributes that really aren't accurate and you can't rely on them? That makes sense as a question.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's very true that a lot of higher education institutions allow students, for instance, to retain their credentials, their authentication credentials, for a long time. And there's a good reason for that. It's called alumni giving, right? And so what happens, though, is for their own purposes, because they want to make that distinction between a higher education experience and alumni giving, they will actually change an affiliation internally in their identity management system. And that's what feeds, right, the federated access. So as Jim was talking about, there's an attribute called affiliation. That affiliation should change when the student graduates and moves to a different status, or it will drop out, right? So that is, in fact, I was talking to Jim about this earlier. Many institutions send that affiliation to you every time the person logs in. But they may not. It is not required now. But if that is required by national facilities, the other thing in Common does is large-scale change management. And we can basically go out to the community and say, this is required now for access into these large-scale facilities, and work with IT. We work with central IT to make that happen. Affiliation is a relatively easy to pass because there's no privacy issues associated with it. Typically, no privacy, because it's a controlled, it's a controlled vocabulary, faculty, staff, students, things like that. Does that help?
Yeah, thanks.
I think I'll also add that in the assurance program, there's an assurance attribute about liveness of attributes and how long they're allowed to be stale before they have to be updated. And so that adds another level to that affiliation attribute that Ann was talking about. Please.
Yes, I've got a question, probably starting with Julian and then perhaps going to the other two panelists. So Julian, when you gave your presentation on the academic research fleet, I saw this tangled web of sponsors, ships, and universities, and I was waiting for the other shoe to drop to talk about how miserable this makes your life with regard to identity and access management. And so I'm very curious as to what some of the and of course that doesn't even speak to the people who are on the ship, which is yet another layer. I'm curious as to some of the specific challenges that arise in your world, and then to your colleagues sitting on either side of you, what you think some of the future enhancements to identity programs might be that would in fact make your life more pleasant.
That's a great question, Sean. I say one of the biggest challenges is that the academic fleet isn't sort of centrally managed. There's no one IT department pushing policies down. Every ship, it seems, and the whole fleet has their own unique way of doing things. And so the way that the Sekuliak might implement identity management might not be the same way that the Sally Ride implements identity management. So we're trying to get to a place where we have a set of recommended standards where we suggest you adopt these, but we have no way to enforce that. That is down to the individual operator's prerogative if they want to do it or not. And so it's really, really tough to try to design a nice seamless experience for the end users, the researchers, when we have no control over the organizational level implementations. So that's really challenging. And then, of course, we already talked about the offline nature that maybe this won't work at all because you can't reach out to the internet to verify your identity. So a lot of challenges across the fleet for that.
Sounded like you just described one. I mean, maybe this is unworkable, but caching something for offline use, for example, that could be something that could be considered in some
Certainly,
fashion.
yeah, that's definitely something we want to try and work into the design.
Okay, all right, very good. Thanks.
Oh, we've got another question. Oh, two more. Go ahead.
So I'm just thinking about the AI panel that we had earlier today, and Dave Hart talking about the challenge that organizations are having with research security now, the affiliation, nationality of people, where students, or they have a joint appointment at two different locations. And I'm thinking like a lot of campuses now are using digital IDs. Is this something that In Common could possibly help out with, or offer some solutions to help streamline this and make it a little bit more secure at least, or facilitate being able to vet these IDs to allow access to resources. And I'll just add, this is something that we were just discussing, saying, should we be publishing our staff directory with people's names or email addresses? And, a lot of organizations like Access use those types of resources to verify that someone is affiliated with an organization. Because a lot of places, if you apply for a job, it's through Workday, you'll get a .edu for that organization email address, even though you're not an employee, a student, which can be, used to apply for allocations for access, or, so I'm just wondering if this is something that InCommon might be able to assist with.
Yeah, so I heard, let me tease out your question a little bit. I heard a little bit about how do I know that this person is from an U.S. institution? Okay, good, cool. Another one is, how do I know that this person is who they say they are? So identity verification, okay. Did I miss something else? Is that pretty much the role with the organization? Gotcha, yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, InCommon and those federated access relies on an organizational identity and access management system. So because this is a B2B type of relationship, right, the credential that student would use to access a service outside the institution is the same one they would use to access their own learning management system, or if they're a student employee, update their tax ID information, things like that. So it's sort of like eating your own dog food in terms of the credential, and then leveraging that, hopefully not dog food, hopefully it's champagne, for access into other services. When a organization registers a single sign-on service or a service in common, you will know, for instance, what country they're from. For instance, all the InCommon information about a single sign-on system that we publish, it has InCommon US branded information in it, so you know it's a US institution. So if you get a user from an InCommon institution, you know it's US. There are exceptions to that. I think we have 5 exceptions. If you want to know who they are, I can look them up, but we have registered an IDP, for instance, for NIH, for access, for collaborative access into, for infectious disease research for in Mali, as an example. So you know it's from US, the person's from US, or they are affiliated, I should be specific, they're affiliated with a US institution. The institution can also pass faculty, staff, or student to you as part of the federated transaction. And it can also pass the information that Jim had up there around identity assurance. Now, on the identity assurance pieces, it's not broadly implemented yet across US. So if you ask for those today, you're probably not going to get those. So the spec is there, but not a lot of folks are submitting, are actually leveraging the spec. So InCommon has been working with NIH to understand the new needs for access to their controlled access data repositories. And many of you are probably aware they're starting to require sort of identity proofing and a level of assurance that's higher than what has been done in the past. And so we're working with them on how that might work, leveraging InCommon infrastructure to be able to do that. So we recently published a survey on identity verification and fraud prevention to broad US higher education institution to see how, yes, we have this research need right over here, but what broader need do you have for fraud prevention? Got a very interesting set of use cases back. We got about 170 responses. But community colleges, for instance, came back and said, we're getting people signing up for community college student, leveraging our email address and then going out and doing phishing attempts with other, so there's broad need across higher education for identity proofing. So we're going to leverage that and put together, again, another large-scale change management effort across our 1,000 organizations to say, hey, here's the rationale, here's the need, and here's some tools and techniques to help you. And we will put together basically a training and education program and push it out there with the goal of not only supporting the signaling through the Federation, but also the capability. I think that's what we care about, right? It's the capability of identity verification for the specific use cases we have in scope.
I think that, I was going to say, that might be a good segue into those tools. That might be, you say, we recommend these tools to verify that student is who they say they are, and their ID is real and they haven't stolen it from someone. Those tools probably cost money. And so it's like, we want to enable these tools, but maybe we aren't giving the funding to actually get those tools. And so funding's always a problem.
No, thank you. That's a good point. Okay, we've got another question here.
Okay, I'm really glad to see this panel. It's a very interesting topic. I want to step back and ask a more basic question. I'm pretty sure I understand the answer to this, and I'm sure a lot of other people here understand it, but there may also be some who don't. Say more, please, about the relationship between CI logon and InCommon. What does the one do versus the other, and how do they interact with each other, and how might that change and evolve over time?
Yeah, maybe I can take this one. So CI Logon through the University of Illinois is a participant in the InCommon Federation, and so we are built on top of all the good things that the InCommon Federation provides. And what we do at the CI Logon level on top of InCommon is allow research projects to connect their OpenID Connect applications to the Federation, because at the core, the InCommon Federation uses SAML, the Security Assertion Markup Language. And so if your applications are SAML, that's great. You can connect directly to InCommon and you're good to go. But if you want to support OpenID Connect, or you want some higher level services for managing groups and roles and onboarding and offboarding that are built on top of the InCommon Federation, then that's what CI Logon can provide.
But whenever you see login with your institutional credentials, that's InCommon.
Any follow-up?
That's what I'm trying to imagine. So I guess my perspective on it was I thought CI Logon was more of a tool or a service that you could integrate with in order to get access to the InCommon federated identities. Is that a way to look at it as well?
Yes. So we're the goal of CI Logon is to make it seamless, make it easy to integrate with the federated identity, to integrate with the Federation, and offer these additional services on top of the Federation that we see that are needed.
CI Logon is not necessary, though, or required in order to access InCommon.
Correct.
Okay, great. All right, thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think CI Logon helps the services connect into all of the identities and the people.
Right.
I think InCommon brings the people in this particular instance, InCommon brings the people, Jim brings the services.
Perfect. All right, thank you very much.
And I was going to add, like, as an end user, that, I'm an NSF-funded project. I can go to Jim and say, okay, I need federated identity. CI Logon provides that service for me. They've already done all the work. I don't have to do it over again directly to InCommon. I can just go, hey, I want to get into InCommon. I go through CI Logon to get there.
Which is exactly what we're doing at USC ISI with Sphere. So good to hear that. Thank you.
Great, please go ahead.
Okay, and I'm going to take it down even further, I guess, because I think I'm using it wrong, perhaps, because I've always seen the In Common Federation more of a giant database of metadata files for making two people be able to shake hands and make the IDP SP connection. But some of the things I've been seeing here make it almost look like that you're able to act as like a first stage IDP, and then we could be the almost like a federated IDP under. Is there that, or do I have it right the first time where you're just basically having a giant database of the metadata files that allow us to come together?
Let's see. I'll say yes to both of those. And the reason why is In Common is an ecosystem, it's a community. So yes, we enable the technical standards, which everybody associates us with, but we also work with anchor tenants, communities. Really good example, I saw Romaine was here. I don't see him. And Von Welch, for instance, developed security incident response that works globally, and adopted it and pushed it out across In Common community. So it's not just like a big database, it's people coming together to figure out how to solve problems, how do we escalate, how do we signal MFA, how do we signal assurance, how do we make it easier for users to do all this so that when, I have to answer my earlier, when NSF comes out and says, like last year, you have to layer on MFA, we worked with Central IT to do that. So the researchers didn't have to do a thing. Now on your first point, are we running an IDP? Are we just a big IDP? Technically, no. But we do have catalysts. We have trusted partners that will do that for you. The guy at the end of the table is one of those. That guy is one of those. And actually Mike Korn is part of a Catalyst organization too. So they're trusted partners that if you need someone to run an IDP for you, there are people out there that you can pay to host,
Yeah,
right,
well,
an IDP.
Yeah, we have that part, but say like, we want to allow several different universities or organizations or whatever in to use some tool or whatever. Right now, I'm going to In Common looking at the thing and using that metadata to then just make a standard IDP SP connection in my own system. I've always kind of hoped for something that where I could like go to a central place and say like, oh, almost like adding groups, right? It's like, oh, I'd like to be able to add these following groups to be able to get into this thing without having to go into my my own IDP and make each one of those separate.
Yes.
Am I doing it right? Is there a simpler way? Am I doing it the hard way? That's I guess
Well,
mostly what I'm asking.
let's talk at break.
Okay, great, awesome.
Okay.
Okay, while you're thinking of another question, I'm going to ask the panel, what is MFA fatigue and how do we address it?
Yeah, so I have a story about this where, like Tron, I fight for the user. And so I end up doing sort of end user support for some of our folks on the vessels. And one of my crew members needed to get into our VPN, which required MFA, in order to get into an app, which then also required an MFA. And they started to get really, really frustrated. Like, I just need 5 seconds to click a button to approve a timesheet, and it's taking me 5 minutes to do so. And it's frustrating. And so this is what SSO is designed to help alleviate. Do it once, and it's just smooth sailing through all your different applications.
SSO stands for a single sign-on, right? And so, Mark or Ann want to say more about maybe how we control that?
One thing I will say about particularly the MFA fatigue is oftentimes the MFA implementation, the MFA control is handled at the IDP level. And many organizations choose a very valid security posture of a uniform policy for when that is invoked. The challenge, whether it's a boat, whether you're in the field It comes up, I come from a medical background, comes up in things like ER rooms and surgery wards. Those are specific areas where this kind of uniform policy for MFA can be very challenging. So when these kinds of areas are, those are oftentimes when you have a conversation around what is the risk balance that you're looking for the specific implementation, so that it doesn't take 5 minutes to get to the button that takes 5 seconds to approve a timesheet. So again, it's looking at the security lens, both from the service provider, the application side, and then what the identity provider or the login method is doing, and negotiating a better place. I think when we were talking earlier, there's an observation that a frustrated end user is probably more of a security risk than a content end user. So sometimes trying to strike that balance is a bit of a journey, but that's kind of my take on it.
And then also, like, it becomes more sometimes of an organizational problem. Like, maybe you set a policy that you're in that hospital ward, you're in the surgery room, those computers don't need to MFA as often, maybe, you know, but that's more of a organizational rule, not a IT control.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, whether it's the medical setting or other settings, you can sometimes frame it as, well, there's other compensating controls. You know, a surgery ward is not general access. There's other kinds of security. So some of the implicit things for why MFA is implemented are still relevant, are still valid, but they may not need to be enforced, or there's other ways of compensating for that.
Great, and we have another question, please.
This is probably for Jim and Ann, the new identity assurance information. Are you leveraging NIST's identity assurance levels because you're also working with the like research.gov and NIH and using their language for the IALs?
Sort of. So Jim mentioned a name called REFEDS. It stands for the Research and Education Federations. It is sort of a coalition of federation operators and interested parties. I think LIGO has participated on this for a long time, to define international federation standards to enable that global interaction that we talked about earlier in my slides. Some of these standards came out of the US and have now been given to the REFEDS standards group for maintenance. MFA is one of those. So what we have been doing with NIH is essentially saying, you know, there are international federation standards that you may want to look at, and they are considering, actually, they have determined that the federation standard for IL2, if you're familiar with NIST 863, that there's a REFED standards, given all the things that are going on in common, the trust fabric, that it's a B2B, that we do, you know, security incident response, we do a tabletop exercise every year. You know, if you look at the full gamut of what In Common in the community does to maintain that trust, they basically have said, yeah, it's comparable. So we are working with them, and that's what sort of prompted this whole survey, to start rolling out essentially these assurance standards for two campuses. So I'm happy to share those with you. Yeah, absolutely, NIST is part of this, but they have accepted the REFED standards as comparable.
So I think that's connected to another question that we were discussing at lunch, is how do you reconcile federal guidance in the United States with the need for international federation? Because many of our science projects have international collaborations, international partners. And so I think, Anne, you were describing one example there where try to set the international refed standard to be comparable to a NIST standard that would be applicable for accessing a federal system. Are there other examples maybe the panelists could offer?
And that's only for IL2.
Another standard that is currently in the works is a revision to the MFA signaling. As Ann said, the MFA signaling originally started in Common, but then was elevated to this global specifications body. I have to be a little bit careful. With the interest and the desire to adopt phishing-resistant MFA, which is a stronger authentication criteria, there's a active group that I and a couple of other folks sit on that are iterating that MFA standard. That group has representatives from, I think there's a research, one of the DOE research labs, myself, there's members from InCommon, but there are also members from our colleagues in Sweden and a couple of other institutions. So it's more of a collaborative consensus driving, but again, it is something where you can't, the conversation gets a little tense if you just say, well, here's what NIST says. We want to be consistent with NIST, but we also have to frame it in something that also resonates with our global partners, because this kind of standard only works if it's implementable everywhere from CERN to the research labs you folks work to. So that's an example of where that kind of collaboration can happen, but it takes time.
I think we have maybe 1 minute left. So I think I'll just ask the panelists if they have any concluding thoughts, anything we missed that you want to make sure to share with the group.
If you aren't leveraging InCommon, leveraging this multilateral federation collaboration just at your organizations, I would encourage folks to just take a little bit of time to investigate it. In my experience, it really reduces the friction for people to collaborate.
I think I would just point out my appreciation for all these partnerships that we have and this incredible community. And I know I'm not the only one in the room that's probably like, what am I doing up here? How are we going to make this work for our organization? And we have partners that we can reach out to. And so I just want to say thanks to the community for all the collaboration.
And I just end with the same thing. This is great. Really appreciate the ability to connect with you all. And I am a beginner in this research space, and I'm very interested to hear what your concerns are, either with what you're hearing about InCommon, but just in general regarding research identity and how we can help.
Yep, I want to thank the panelists. I think bringing this community, the Summit, NSF research community, and together with the InCommon community, as Anne observed, it's not just a database, it's a community of people working progressively to improve the value of this multilateral federation. And so I'm glad you all are here and we had this discussion, and let's keep the discussion going. So thanks to the panelists. Thank you.